Hello, and thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited you could be here because today we're talking about some of the fundamentals and basics of getting a business off the ground. We're going to talk about how to start the business. We're going to talk about how to grow the business and how to make the business successful. More important than anything else, we're really going to talk about a lot of the factors as an entrepreneur that you need to be focusing on to make your business successful. So with us today is Andrew Hutton. Now, he's actually the founder and CEO of DayOne, and DayOne is a pioneering on how they educate and support entrepreneurs with a program that's one part community membership and one part entrepreneurial boot camp. DayOne provides founders and future founders the place to learn how to start, build, and grow a business. Now, prior to founding DayOne, Andrew was Chief Innovation Officer at Human Ventures, a startup studio in New York City. And in his time at Human, Andrew led the incubation and launch of startups like Tiny Organics, Paloma Health, LUPII, and Milo as well. Andrew, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
What you do so essential, man. I mean, we all see the statistics that the majority of business owners fail. So in your time in working with a lot of startups, kind of what do you think that is? What do you think are some of the fundamental principles that startups oftentimes miss that they've got to focus on to become successful?
Oh, so many. I love that you framed it that way. That's one way I just articulate our mission and just think about what gets me out of the bed in the morning. Like, can we reduce that failure rate from like 90% to something lower than that, right? Can we get that down, especially for early stage founders, right? Who take a leap, who jump in and kind of don't ever make it, don't ever get that first inflection point, right? Like, if you have a business that grows, scales, and it starts to fade, you know, everyone's pretty okay with that, right? But it's those founders who just don't get out the gates, right? That I'm really trying to help, and what we've built DayOne to be sort of like a new kind of school. School is not the greatest word, but it's where else would you go to find that entree, the entry point to being an entrepreneur, right? And so I'll tell you, there's so many factors that we try to impart for an entrepreneur to help them be successful, to lower that failure rate. The very number one thing that we try and do is we embed founders into communities, into a community and networks that are going to help sustain them, right? The entrepreneurial journey is the most windy, uncertain. You don't know what barrier and door you're going to need to open next. And so the only way to sort of stay with it, both like emotionally, mentally, and just to have the right answer at your fingertips, the right connection, the person to open the next door, is just have a lot of people around you, and a lot of the right people who have got your back, who are rooting for you. I say it all the time. No successful entrepreneur ever did it alone, right? They did it in a village. They did it with people. It's the unfair advantage. And so that's the number one thing that I think entrepreneurs need to basically add to their toolkit. It's not about having an amazing product is great, brand is amazing, but community, people around you, that's the number one factor for success. And I think everything else stems from that, right? Staying in the game, making sure you fail when you quit in some ways. And so how do you design your kind of journey for longevity? How do you ensure you don't burn out, you don't run out of money? Like, it's basically a stay alive game while you figure everything out. So we could go in 100 directions from there, but community, staying in it, and then there's a lot more of tactical of what to do and how to do it. But once you have those two big pieces, you're kind of off to the races.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You ever watch Undercover Billionaire?
I haven't, but I know it. I got it. Yeah.
I don't watch TV. I mean, I somehow watched an episode that got obsessed and had to watch all of them. But he went to the Small Business Development Center, which I didn't even know really existed, to be honest with you. But it was astonishing that, even him starting a business with billionaire status, he went to the Small Business Development Center and he surrounded himself by people that understood the community, that understood this. And he really, in the beginning stages, it was all about what you described, man. It was all about networking, talking to people, getting the lay of the land and understanding the industries to be in and what was happening in the community and what the demographic was. It was pretty cool because it's spot on with what you described. And this guy's a billionaire, right? He's built billion-dollar businesses. He's starting a startup and he goes in and does the same thing. So it just goes to show the vast importance of having that right community around you.
Yeah. And I'll take a step to unpack that, right? Like, if you're listening, you're like, I'm coming out. Here's what I see, right? We have founders joining DayOne who are coming out of 20-year careers doing something, right? Some of it entrepreneurial. Maybe, a woman in our program now was started a yoga studio for 20 years. Other folks have just, had 20-year careers in like luxury and fashion or something, right? Or they've been bankers so, that's one persona. Lots of other folks, maybe younger, maybe kind of have always been angling towards building a business. So you might be asking like, well, who do I really need to be around? I have my colleagues, I got some friends. Like it's really simple. You really need founder peers, right? You really need a high density of people who are going on the journey with you. Those are going to be your most important connections and confidants and comrades through this journey. They're going to be solving similar challenges. You're all growing your networks at the same time. There's no like one like king making person you need to know, right? It's about knowing a lot of people. And frankly, your peers are going to be your best supporters. They're going to be able to be the shoulder to cry on. They're going to work with that problem through that problem with you because they know they're going to have it tomorrow. Right. And so there's really no like substitute for having just people around you. They're going to keep you going when the going gets tough. Right. Like I said, that shoulder to cry on. There's so many different angles for how just having a couple dozen founder friends would do. And you look around, you probably don't have those couple dozen founder friends. Like there's only a few ecosystems. It's Silicon Valley, New York City has chunks of it, right? There's a few ecosystems where you could just like walk outside the door and you're inundated with founders. The vast majority of us, especially in our world of virtual work and Zoom, are not even close to that, right? And so, yeah, we're trying to just create that shortcut and build these create places to build relationships with other founders. That's
you mentioned a lot of people that you help, come out of 20, 30-year career type situations into starting a business. Have you found that there are common traits that entrepreneurs have that end up being successful versus the ones that don't?
It's a really a willingness to learn both about the problem that they, are passionate about solving and like really understanding what's going on, right? Because as well as learning about what they don't know about building, right? To have like a sort of beginner's attitude and a sense of like, okay, I'm going to just soak in all these perspectives, right? I might not even agree with it, but maybe I just don't know what I don't know, right? So if somebody comes in with an attitude that basically says, man, this is going to be a tough road. My learning curve is steep. I need to soak it all in, as well as sort of treating themselves as like, I'm the entrepreneur. I have a vision, but I kind of don't know, right? I need to go be humble and talk to my customer. I need to just really get in there, sort of like this, our billionaire, right? Like just being sort of not thinking too highly of themselves or their ideas and just learning about, man, how does this industry work? Who is this customer? So it's really a learning curiosity, a curious learner's mindset. It's those types of founders who basically, I'll basically round out this idea with like the opposite, right? And it's basically somebody who just believes their own ideas, God's gift to whoever they're trying to serve for however well-meaning they may be. The odds of that person failing are super high, right? They are not going to get it right the first time, and they're not going to be able to do the stuff they need to figure it out. When they collide with the market doesn't quite want what they have, they're not even going to be able to pivot, right? So that person, to be honest, most founders are that person before they start. They don't realize how little they know. And so there's a little bit of like ego breaking down for a lot of founders. But if you come in with the mindset of like, I need to learn about this customer and this problem in this industry, as well as, man, I need to learn everything myself, you're just going to be a lot better off. And you still might not find it because it's just like hard to be a founder. There's some irreducible amount of failure in entrepreneurship. We're not going to get that 90% failure rate to zero, but we can get it a lot lower. And if people are learners, they'll be on the right track.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of the failures caused because they're not learners, which seems to be a large part of the problem. Which again is really interesting because I think it's where imposter syndrome comes from. Is that we start businesses, we have no idea what we're doing. Like we're learning all these skill sets that are needed to be able to succeed. And then in the beginning, it's overwhelming because we can't learn those skill sets enough, and we feel like others expect that we do. And then eventually, as you grow a business, you've accumulated enough skill sets to be okay. But it really comes down to that exact same principle. But what about basic knowledge? When you're helping them, do you find we're talking about traits that you need to have. What about basic knowledge? Is there basic knowledge somebody needs about general entrepreneurship or running businesses that you really think is critical to success?
Yeah. I do think it's more like mindsets and muscles than necessarily knowledge just because of that basic principle. Like, the world is moving fast. If you're trying to do something properly new, it hasn't been done before, hasn't been learned before. So you have to go learn it. That said, there are some, so it's mindsets, it's muscles. So I'll talk about a muscle first, and then I'll get into like an actual like expertise or skill set. Here's maybe the most important muscle. If you got the mindset of a learner, the most important muscle is just to be fearless in shipping your stuff and talking to your customer, just being out there. So I guess it goes along with being a learner, but just being like unabashedly like shameless about asking questions, knowing you're dumb and just like not caring, putting your thing out there and not caring that it's bad or not ready yet. That sort of like ship it mentality, that muscle needs to be developed. We're all afraid of rejection and failure. We're trained through school and corporate careers to literally not do that, to literally only present our best work, to only present our A plus, papers. But entrepreneurship only rewards action, and only rewards you learning, and you can only really learn by putting something out there. So that's the first thing that we try to break. Again, if we're breaking down mindsets or getting learners, then we're adding in the muscle of just like do it, frankly, just do it, right? Get things out there. The skill sets, then the kind of knowledge that like a really good entrepreneur has is they have it's closer to like a gut knowledge than like a head knowledge of when they're onto something, when it comes to like, oh, that customer is really telling me the truth about their problem, versus a customer who's like, just like, I don't know, bloviating, right? Or they understand when like, when they kind of know what it feels like for a product to kind of have that market fit, where for the idea to have this like so much adoption from the customer base that it just like comes out of them. And so they know what to look for, and they know how to not chase things that are only halfway there. Maybe tying it all the way back to that idea, right? Founders who fail, who are kind of set up for failure, are ones who start and kind of believe they're onto something when they're not. It's almost, I guess when I say it out loud, I'm like, duh, that's exactly it. But just like think with me for a second. If you're onto something and it's not going to work, you want to know that as soon as possible so you can go try something new. The founders who make it have that kind of sixth sense. And it's not really sixth sense. It's kind of come from experience of seeing things work, from knowing what a good, like knowing what, when customers want something, what that looks like, and how to ask the right questions to get it from them, or how to present a product so that it elicits the right, an honest reaction, an honest response. So that's one of the core things I like wish I could teach everybody. And I think I'm still learning. I think all entrepreneurs are kind of honing their gut and sense to only chase things that are just going to take off.
What about what takes off and what doesn't? I mean, we've talked a little bit about the skill set. We talked about the mindset of the entrepreneur, but what about the business? Have you found commonalities in businesses that really take off and succeed versus those that don't?
Yeah. So here's another thing for sure. Here's the most common thing. Things that take off are simple. Things that take off have taglines that can survive a game of telephone, right? When friends tell it to friends, tell it to friends, it's the same message, right? They sort of fit into a paradigm, a zeitgeist, but maybe change a little bit, right? It's the thing, but different, right? But better. So real businesses that take off are both like profound, but simple. So yeah, so if you do everything else and you don't have a simple business, you're going to be struggling until you do, right? You could take off in the end, but like simple businesses, simple ideas are the ones that really escape. If you kind of use that as like a rule, as like a check that basically says you can't bring a complex business to the table, right? You have to bring a simple business. It'll force you to like really look for like deep problems that people have that can be solved by simple answers. Meaning, if like we're just like riffing on some topic like food waste, that's a hard one, right? And then I bring an answer and it's like a run-on sentence with like, we're going to connect all these people in these marketplaces of restaurants and grocery stores, and it's going to have, the government involved, and it's going to be this. It's like, okay, maybe that works, but it's not really going to take off because it's hyper complex. It basically, you set yourself up for a long slog to even see if there's something there. But if you're like, oh yeah, it's a thing that does this, it's a thing that breaks down food. Oh, now if that works and it fits the problem, it's simple, it's going to go, right? And actually, I think I was just looking on Twitter. Somebody just launched a kitchen composting machine that had like $10 million in pre-sales on Kickstarter. So a simple idea: break down your food, reduce whatever, right? And it just like took off. And I'm like, this is not new, but it killed it, right? So yeah, simple, 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 simple.
How do you prepare? What are the things if you're going to launch a business? What are some of the things on the checklist that need to be there to properly prepare to succeed as a startup?
Yeah. So we have some of this kind of built out into a workflow, right? There are these steps, right? And then, like all things, you get good at them, you get to break the rules, and you get to kind of, riff on the sheet music, right? But I mean, the first thing that any founder who has a business idea needs to do is just get it down on paper, right? And think about it from, we use a thing called a new venture canvas inside of DayOne that asks 10 questions. And it's basically, these are kind of simple, obvious questions, but it's gets you to think through these 10 factors that intertwine to basically give yourself a view of like, what is this business from this earliest stage? Will it hold water? Is it simple? And allows you to share it with people, allows you to get peers and advisors to give you feedback on it. So the very first thing you need to do is just get it out of your head, right? Because good ideas die in the dark. Just put it on paper and then start to share it, right? I mean, that sounds simple of like, how do you get started? But really, that's like when we're talking about going from like not a founder to a founder, like a wannabe entrepreneur to an entrepreneur, just put it down on paper first, and then you're on your way, right? Once you put things down on paper and you start to like see the forest for the trees, you want to begin to articulate, okay, where are my biggest, what we call, we use the words assumptions a lot, right? Or hypotheses. Like entrepreneurs should be thinking like scientists, right? And so once you have your initial hypothesis of how I think the business goes, basically you treat every single one of those like, well, I think this is how it should go, right? I'm assuming this is what the business is going to look like. And then you go out, set out to prove those things true or false, right? Like a scientist. The smart way to do that is to think about what's the most existential assumption, the thing that if it was not true, this whole thing falls apart, right? And then just focus there. So the other thing I'll layer in more of a mindset is successful founders all know how to focus and all know how to prioritize, because there's going to be infinite things pulling at your attention. You'll always have a to-do list that's bigger than what you can do in a day. And it's an extra entrepreneurship and founding, especially early stages, an exercise in just knowing what to do. And so focusing on the right things to learn and then going out and doing it. So I could walk you all the way down that path of like, how do I usually start learning? How do you start with customer interviews and going into prototyping? And there's a whole sort of like kit, if you will, like process that we unpack in our community and our programs. But yeah, it's there's the art and then there's the science, right? Or the science and then there's the art, right? And so you take those steps, put things on paper, get it out there. Those frameworks repeat, right? Keep putting things out there. It comes back to those mindsets and those muscles. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. There's a lot to it. I don't want to go too deep.
But it leads me to another one. Like, well, what kind of challenges do you find are typical for a startup? Like where do they get stuck because they weren't expecting to deal with certain kind of challenges?
So we just had this session in the cohort that's running through our fellowship right now. And it was one of my old colleagues from my consulting days who was fielding questions on like how to define the problem that you're actually solving. And every single founder who spoke basically said, here's what I think I'm doing. Can you like help? Do I have it? Right. And invariably they didn't, right? Invariably they were like talking more about their solution than the problem. They were talking more about like the friction to buying the thing than the actual like problem, right? And so most founders fall into that trap, right? Most founders fall into the idea trap, into the like, what can I do trap, versus the like, where's the real kind of like crux of it for this customer base, right? So yeah, people gloss over the problem all the time. It's because you can't really do anything with a problem. You discover it and then you have to keep building, right? The things that make progress are things you build. Those are solutions inherently, right? And so one is like nebulous and it's somebody else's the problem, it's not necessarily yours. And then the other thing is something you can work on. So it's very tempting to just keep focusing on the thing that you can see and do, but it will, I don't know, the chances of it like continue, like by focusing over here on the idea versus the problem leading you to the promised land are pretty low, because you're not going to have it right the first time. Like you're not going to be able to calibrate and iterate and pivot as needed. And so yeah, not focusing on the problem is super common. And I fall prey to it, right? I get focused on the shiny things, but like the why is behind anything. I guess like most disciplines, the why is what's always important.
When do you know, and you talked about, people coming from a career into starting a business, and you said some of them, 20, 30 years to make that choice. When do you know? Like, when do you know is the right time for you to go off and start your own business?
I love that. I mean, I think we're living through this awesome sort of renaissance where, it's a mix of like information being everywhere. It's a mix of like Shark Tank and Undercover Billionaire, like Silicon Valley on HBO, right? Like entrepreneurship is more accessible and known than ever. Like you have people coming out of college not necessarily wanting to be an iBanker anymore or a consultant. They want to go work for Facebook and Google so they can be like a founder. So there's definitely more of a draw than ever. There's also much more of a accessibility than ever, right? You can sell on Amazon, you can use, or Shopify, you can use all these tools and platforms to build tech without actually knowing any technology. It's kind of amazing. So we're in a golden age, right? So how do you know? I guess I start there because I don't think it's that binary anymore. It's not like this like moment where it's so difficult that you have to be this like born bred like Elon Musk entrepreneur to like no. It's not like that big of a divide. It's much more like, man, I can go be an entrepreneur and then go back into this. I think there's gonna be and I think the fluidity of being an entrepreneur or not is actually going to break down. It's going to get more fluid. People are going to be entrepreneurs. They'll be intrapreneurs. They'll take those experiences and they'll be better at their marketing role or their whatever, chief of staff role. I don't even know. So all that to say, I would actually encourage people almost to like flip your premise of like, when do you know? When do you know? The barriers are really low. Just like start something, right? Have it be a side hustle. Have it be a project, right? Don't make it like so big, like it's like this career shift, right? Just be entrepreneurial. So that's one thought. I do think though, there is this thing, and I do recognize there's a moment where when you start into that, like, so if you kind of like listen to your, to the winds in your soul and you're like, I think I want to be entrepreneurial. I think there's something to do, but you haven't like found it yet. You don't have that like thing to jump off the cliff for. That's an important phase, right? That's a phase that I think is distinct when you're looking for conviction around an idea. Are you a fit? And it kind of comes in two ways. You should be, actually, this goes back to like, why do a lot of founders fail? I don't think they answer these two questions. They're not actually chasing good ideas, and they're not chasing ideas that are good for them. They're just chasing an idea that they had, but they don't really do the work to understand, is it good? And there's a huge caveat there, because most ideas are only good in practice. They're only good when you put a lot of work into them. They're only good after you pivot 10 different times, right? So I don't want to like give people the impression that you can like dream up $1 million or $1 billion business and just like, then it's easy, but you can definitely pick a bad idea. I promise you, right? You can pick an idea that's not simple. You can pick an idea that's, it's not a good fit for you. That requires way too much technology or way too many connections that you don't have. Like you have to be a real realist, a very sober realist when you're getting into it. But if you ask these two questions and answer them honestly, then there's a moment of conviction where you're like, this is a business. I can do this thing. This is exciting. And if you start to then have the people around you who are like pushing you forward, you're going to do it. Right. And it's one of those, like, it when you feel it sort of things. But if you take the right steps, you'll have a much greater shot. Otherwise, you're going to sit in analysis paralysis. Otherwise, you're going to sit in imposter syndrome. Otherwise, you're going to sit on the bench. Right. So it's kind of amazing that so many people are jumping off the ledge already. And I want to help more. I want to help more people jump off the ledge and answer those questions.
What about in the first quarter? What are some things that happen in the very, first 3-4 months of somebody starting a business that they should expect and prepare for?
Yeah. So the first 3 or 4 months are the fun months. So the first thing to do is to not let that like to be prepared for it to get a lot harder, right? I think it's about being prepared. I think it truly is, right? And so while you're figuring out if the idea is a good one and it's a good one for you, if you're on the other side of that, you're starting to put the pieces together, you're starting to get out there, those are like the fun, easy months. Prepare yourself for the journey. So one piece of advice that I always leave people with, it's usually my go-to when someone just says, what good advice could you give founders? It's going to take you a lot longer than you think. Straight up. So if you're like, I'm going to get this in 6 months and I'm going to raise money and I'm going to quit my job and I have 6 months in the bank and I'm going to raise this amount of money, you're just not, right? Like, sure, having that like pressure will get you go faster. It's true. Like that's why entrepreneurs just work so hard, right? Because like their dinner often depends on it, but it's going to take you a lot longer than you expect. So prepare both financially, figure out how you're going to last longer than you expect, whether it's savings, whether it's a side hustle, whether it's freelancing, whether it's a partner, whether it's whatever. You just need to give yourself enough space to not give up financially, and then mentally, right? Set yourself up not to burn out. Set yourself up not to work 18-hour days, right? So if you have a good idea and you think it's a good fit for you, then figure out your like trajectory, right? When are you going to quit your job? Are you going to work on it on the side for a little bit and then quit? What's going to push you over the edge? How long are you going to last? And then recognize it's going to be longer. If you do that, and so it's interesting because I'm talking about entrepreneurship more than I'm talking about the stuff of it, because I think everyone's going to have to go up through all these other learning curves. And like, I wish I could get to everybody right now before they jump and tell them what I'm telling them, because this is what kills businesses. It's not necessarily the stuff inside of it. It's the preparation. It's the trajectory. It's the, oh man, I got to get a job because I can't do this anymore, or I'm burnt out, or there's almost certainly a business there. There's almost certainly something to be done there. It's just, you run out of runway. So let's like solve for that. And then your chances of success go way up.
And how do you evaluate that? I mean, what kind of things should you be looking at to kind of make sure that you're on the right track as measurement tools or analytics? Or, I mean, what is it you should be looking at to make sure you're on the right track?
Yeah. So whenever you're thinking about like tracking yourself and that kind of question, measurements, metrics, it's obviously stage by stage dependent, right? So let's just take like the earliest stage. So, I mean, eventually you're going to have like legit real metrics, right? And you're in the earliest stage, frankly, most metrics aren't around. Things are just too nebulous, right? But what you can look at in terms of a kind of leading indicator for like, are you on the right track? How are things going? The way I would frame this is you want to, honestly, if there's one metric, one thing that you can be like, did I do enough of this to know it's on the right track, is like, are you talking to enough people? Are you able to reach your customer organically, inorganically, through your networks? I don't care how, but if you're not talking to 5 to 10 people a week in these early stages, one, you're not doing the right stuff. You're not doing enough of it. And so then you can ask yourself why. Is it because you don't have enough time? Maybe you got to recalibrate, right? Is it because you don't know this customer? That's another big problem, right? You can't reach them. If you can't reach this customer to just talk to them, you're never going to sell to them. So even just customer touch points, literally the ability to get to them, is a really good proxy in the very early days. Would also tell you, like, do you even like hustling and getting in front of this person? Do you even like talking to them? Because if you don't, you should quit. You should just pivot and get somewhere else, right? So you should spend as much time as you can with your customer in the early days. And like, you can find a little proxy for like, can you do that, right? Are you getting enough in? I suggest most founders don't quit their job right away, right? You figure out how to do this on the side, because when you're in the early days of things, you're on what I call calendar time, not clock time. So let me unpack that for a second. So the difference between calendar and clock time is I'm not sure where this idea came from. I can't take full credit for it. But it's basically, do you have the ability to just work a full day every day and create meaningful output? If you have that ability, if you have all that work in front of you, then maybe you could go full time. Maybe you've got something to do. But most early stages, you're on what I call calendar time, which is you're waiting for someone to get back to you. You talk to a lot of people and you're waiting for that spark to happen. You like couldn't do the next thing, right? You're just waiting for those pieces to come together. When you're in that phase, and you'll just know it by basically asking like, could you fill up a whole day doing something? When you're in that phase, do not quit your job, right? Because you just don't know when you're going to get out of that phase. You're waiting for the shoe to drop. You're waiting for those pieces to click. And so yeah, it kind of fits with my whole kind of spiel thesis here, which is like, set yourself up for success, figure out sort of at what pace you're going through this, right size your investment in it, full-time, part-time, how else you're supporting yourself, and then be in touch with a lot of people. And if you can't be in touch with a lot of your customers, reevaluate why and maybe figure out another angle of attack.
Andrew, where can I know we just scratched the surface. Where can everybody go to learn more?
So DayOne, we have these. So let me tell you my thesis on like why DayOne is what it is. It's that to really, here's what I'm going to answer your question in two ways, right? There's a lot of content out there. You could listen to this podcast, right? You can listen to, you can go find cool startup resources at Y Combinator. They have a cool library, or First Round Capital is a cool library of resources. There are lots of resources out there. My contention is that reading them gets you 5% of the way there, right? You need to just put it in practice and do the work, and then have the information come to you at the right time, spoken to you by somebody who knows what you're up to in your context. Like, you need to learn it in real time. And so DayOne is a great place to do that. So we have two offerings, two communities that we've launched in the last year, one about a year ago, the other very recently now. And one is called Day Zero, and the other is called the DayOne Fellowship. So Day Zero is the community for, Day Zero founders, founders who are exploring. They're in that pre-conviction phase of what idea is a good idea, is good for me. In there, full of content, resources, the workflow, the tools, and the people to help you get the job done. And then DayOne, what we call our DayOne Fellowship, is this second stage. Okay, I've got to go build my business, really figure out this customer. I'm closer to clock time. I'm just rolling in it. I need guidance. I need support, and I need these people around me. So there is a lot of content out there, but I think if you want to put it together, DayOne is filling in a gap in these early stages.
That's awesome. Thanks for coming on with us today. This has been really,
I loved it. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I love what you do. I mean, just thank you so much, because there's not a lot out there that focus on the startup community. So I just love what you're building. Yeah.
And there's so many types of founders. If you don't think you're building a startup, but you're building another kind of business, like, yes, you do you. Like, don't let the nomenclature and the narratives from Silicon Valley change it. Like, entrepreneurship is entrepreneurship. It's all hard. It all draws on the same stuff. And yeah, like, you're building something great. So, like, that's
awesome. Thanks,
you deserve support. Thanks so much, Ty.
So listen, if you're watching this, more than likely, if you're here with us right now, you are in the beginning stages of your business. And look, the reality is, and my favorite quote ever comes from Warren Buffett, that it's good to learn from your mistakes. It's better to learn from other people's mistakes. And that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned in business, is that you can really shortcut your process and have a significantly better chance of succeeding by learning from people that have already been there, by learning from people that are going through the same struggles. And I literally just got back from a mastermind earlier, where I'm just with those kind of like-minded people. So that's exactly what you have an opportunity with working with Andrew and his team. So I want you to go to joinday1.com. That's joinday1.com. At joinday1.com, you can access the community. You can access Day Zero. You can get a lot of information about DayOne. So you can see some of this information and resources that we just started talking about today. And remember, we just scratched the surface. I mean, it's like Andrew said, when he answered the first question, he said, there's 100 different directions we could go with this. And the reality is, this could be hours and hours and hours of conversations, because there's so many things that Andrew and his team and his community can teach you to help you avoid those pitfalls. So if you want to succeed as an entrepreneur, you got to learn quickly from the people around you. And the best way to do that isn't one by one or listening to one person at a time. It's to be part of an actual community of people that knows what to do, that's going through the same thing, and some of them that don't know. We're all learning together. And the best way to do that is by going to joinday1.com. So make sure you visit joinday1.com. Again, check it out. Where are you? Day Zero, DayOne, the community. It's all really easy to navigate. Everything you need is right there. So make sure you visit joinday1.com. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you have an excellent day.